Hello! We are so excited to show you our native speech capabilities. Welcome back to the English journey. Today, we are discussing how to win the most important battle of the day, the first hour after you wake up. My name is Anna, and I am here to guide you through a morning routine that fuels both your spirit and your English fluency.
And I am Abel. I'm so glad to be here with you, Anna. For many of us, the morning feels like a race. We are already losing. We wake up tired, check our phones immediately, and start the day feeling stressed. Today, we want to talk about how to reclaim that time and use it to build a life you are excited about.
That is such a perfect way to describe it, Abel. A race we are already losing. And I think many of our listeners will hear those words and immediately recognize themselves. They'll think, yes, that is exactly how my morning feels. And the reason I love starting with that image is because it tells us something very important. The morning is not neutral. The morning is not just a quiet time before the real day begins. The morning is, in fact, the foundation upon which your entire emotional and mental experience for the next 16 hours is built. What you do in the first 60 minutes after you open your eyes has a profound and measurable effect on your focus, your mood, your energy, and even your ability to learn a language like English.
Wow, 16 hours. That's a long time to be affected by something that happens in just 1 hour. Can you explain a little more about why that first hour is so powerful, Anna? Because honestly, when my alarm goes off, the last thing I'm thinking about is psychology. I'm thinking about how much I want to go back to sleep.
And that feeling is completely valid, Abel. I want our listeners to know that we are not here to make anyone feel guilty for struggling with mornings. Struggling with mornings is one of the most universal human experiences there is. But let us talk about what is actually happening inside your brain when you wake up, because understanding the science makes it so much easier to make better choices. When you first wake up, your brain is transitioning out of a sleep state. During sleep, your brain has been doing incredible work. It has been consolidating memories, repairing neural connections, and preparing itself for a new day of learning and experiencing. When you wake up, your brain is in what scientists call a hypnopompic state, which is a transitional state between sleep and full wakefulness. In this state, your mind is actually very open and very impressionable. It's almost like fresh soil in a garden. Whatever seeds you plant in those first few minutes will grow throughout the day.
So the brain is kind of like a sponge right after we wake up.
Exactly, a very good way to put it. And here's where the science becomes really interesting. Your brain uses a chemical called cortisol to help you wake up. Cortisol is often called the stress hormone, and it gets a very bad reputation. But in the morning, a natural rise in cortisol is actually healthy and necessary. It gives you energy, it sharpens your focus, it prepares your body to move and engage with the world. This natural cortisol awakening response happens in the first 30 to 45 minutes after you wake up. Scientists call this the cortisol awakening response, and the way you respond to this moment determines whether that cortisol becomes a helpful energy boost or a harmful anxiety spiral.
Okay, so if cortisol is there to help us, why do so many people wake up feeling anxious instead of energized?
That's the most important question of the entire conversation, Abel. And the answer is because of what we do with those first few minutes. If you wake up and immediately reach for your phone, and I mean immediately, before you have even sat up in bed, you're essentially taking that natural cortisol energy and directing it toward comparison, information overload, and digital stimulation. Your brain sees something stressful on the news. Your brain sees a friend's perfect vacation photo and feels a little envious. Your brain reads an email from work before your body has even had a glass of water. And now, all that natural morning energy is being used to process anxiety and stress, rather than being channeled into creativity, intention, and learning. The cortisol that was supposed to energize you is now fueling worry.
I feel so seen right now. That's literally what I do every single morning. My phone is right next to my bed, and the second my alarm goes off, I'm scrolling. I tell myself it's just a wake up, but before I know it, 20 minutes have passed and I feel worse than when I woke up.
And you're not alone, Abel. Research from the American Psychological Association found that a significant percentage of smartphone users check their phones within 5 minutes of waking up. And studies consistently show that those who check social media first thing in the morning report higher levels of anxiety, lower productivity, and more difficulty concentrating throughout the day. And here's something that's especially relevant to our English learners. The ability to focus deeply on a language, to listen carefully to a podcast like this one, to read a paragraph and understand every word, to speak a sentence without losing your thought of train, all of that requires what neuroscientists call sustained attention. And sustained attention is one of the first cognitive abilities to be damaged by early morning smartphone use.
So when I check my phone first thing and then try to study English an hour later, I'm actually fighting against my own brain?
You are fighting against your own brain chemistry, yes. Here's the technical explanation. When you scroll through social media, your brain releases small, rapid bursts of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's a chemical messenger in the brain that is associated with pleasure, reward, and motivation. Every time you see something interesting, every time you get a notification, every time someone likes your post, your brain releases a little hit of dopamine. It feels good in the moment, but the problem is that these dopamine hits are very fast, very shallow, and very random. They train your brain to expect constant novelty. They train your brain to crave rapid switches between different pieces of information. And then when you sit down to do something that requires deep, slow, sustained attention, like learning English vocabulary or listening to a slow podcast and trying to understand every word, your brain feels bored and restless almost immediately. It wants the next notification. It wants the next scroll. It literally doesn't have the patience for deep learning anymore.
That actually explains so much. I always wondered why I can watch videos on my phone for 2 hours without getting tired, but when I try to study English for 15 minutes, I feel exhausted and distracted. It's the dopamine, is it not?
It's absolutely the dopamine system, and this is not a personal weakness, Abel. This is neuroscience. Social media platforms are designed by brilliant engineers and psychologists specifically to maximize your dopamine response and keep you engaged for as long as possible. They're not designed for your well-being. They're designed for your attention. So when you choose to protect your first hour from that dopamine hijacking, you're making a radical, courageous, and deeply intelligent choice. We call this the no-scroll challenge, and the rule is beautifully simple. For the first 60 minutes after you wake up, your phone stays face down. No social media, no news, no email. Just you, your morning, and your intentions.
That sounds both wonderful and terrifying. I think a lot of our listeners are nodding and also feeling a little panicked at the idea. What should we do instead? If we're not scrolling, what do we do with ourselves?
I love that question, and I want to give a very thoughtful and detailed answer, because this is where the morning routine truly comes alive. The first thing I always recommend, and this is backed by a tremendous amount of research in the field of behavioral science, is movement. Before you make coffee, before you check the weather, before you do anything else, move your body. And I want to be very clear about what I mean by movement, because some people hear that word and immediately think they need to run 5 kilometers or do an intense workout. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about light, gentle, intentional physical activity, stretching, walking around your home, doing 10 slow squats, rolling your shoulders, doing a brief yoga routine, even just standing up and shaking your arms and legs for 2 minutes. Any movement is enough to begin what I call the biological wake-up call for your brain.
But why does movement matter for the brain specifically? I always thought exercise was for the body, not the mind.
This is one of the most exciting areas of modern neuroscience, and I'm so glad you asked. When you move your body, even in a very gentle way, several extraordinary things happen simultaneously in your brain. First, your brain increases its production of a protein called BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Scientists sometimes call BDNF miracle grow for the brain, which is a lovely image. BDNF promotes the growth and maintenance of neurons, which are the brain cells responsible for all learning, memory, and cognitive function. When BDNF levels rise, your brain literally becomes more capable of forming new memories and absorbing new information. For a language learner, this is extraordinarily valuable.
So when I go for a short walk in the morning, my brain is actually preparing itself to learn English more effectively?
Precisely. And there is more. Movement also increases blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain located just behind your forehead, and it is responsible for what scientists call executive function. Executive function includes things like planning, decision-making, impulse control, and the ability to stay focused on a task. The prefrontal cortex is also deeply involved in language processing. When you increase blood flow to that region through movement, you are essentially warming up your language center the same way a singer warms up their voice before a performance. You are preparing your brain for its best possible work.
That is such a powerful image, warming up your language center. I think that is going to stick with me. I am curious, though, Anna. How long does someone need to move? Do you need to do it for 30 minutes? Or can even a very short time make a difference?
Research from Dr. John Rady at Harvard Medical School, who wrote the wonderful book called Spark, suggests that even 10 to 20 minutes of light aerobic movement in the morning can significantly improve cognitive function, focus, and learning capacity for the next 2 to 3 hours. So we are not asking for a marathon. We're asking for a walk around the block, a 10-minute stretching routine, or even dancing to 2 or 3 songs in your kitchen. Whatever makes you smile and gets your blood moving. The goal is to arrive at your morning practice feeling awake, alive, and ready to engage with your day with intention.
I love the idea of dancing in the kitchen. That sounds actually fun. Okay, so we have protected our first hour from the phone. We have moved our bodies. What comes next?
What comes next is one of my absolute favorite practices, and it is something that has genuinely changed the emotional quality of my mornings in a deep and lasting way. It is the practice of morning gratitude. And before anyone rolls their eyes or thinks this sounds too simple or too soft, I want to share the neuroscience behind gratitude because the research is truly remarkable. A study published in the journal Neuroimage found that the act of feeling and expressing gratitude activates 2 specific regions of the brain, the medial prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. These are regions associated with moral cognition, reward, and interpersonal bonding. But perhaps even more interesting is research from Dr. Robert Emmons at the University of California, Davis, who found that people who practice gratitude consistently report higher levels of positive emotions, greater life satisfaction, and crucially for us, better sleep and higher energy levels the following morning.
So gratitude actually creates a positive feedback loop. Like being grateful in the morning makes you sleep better, and better sleep makes the next morning easier.
You have understood it perfectly. It is a virtuous cycle. And the way I want our listeners to practice this is not just in their heads and not just in their native language. I want them to practice it out loud in English. Here's the exercise. Every morning, after you have moved your body, sit down somewhere comfortable. It could be at your kitchen table, on your balcony, in your favorite chair. Take 3 slow, deep breaths, and then speak 3 sentences out loud in English. Each sentence begins with the words, "Today I am grateful for," and then you complete the sentence with something specific and genuine.
Can you give us some examples of what those sentences might sound like? I think some of our listeners might not know where to start.
Of course, the key is specificity. Vague gratitude does not activate the brain's reward system as powerfully as specific, detailed gratitude does. So instead of saying, "Today I am grateful for my family," you might say, "Today I am grateful that I could walk to the kitchen this morning without any pain." Instead of saying, "Today I am grateful for good weather," you might say, "Today I am grateful for the way the morning light is coming through my window right now and making everything look golden." Do you see the difference? The specific version requires you to actually visualize and feel the thing you are grateful for, and that visualization and feeling is what activates the neural reward pathways.
And as an English learner, you're also practicing your speaking, your grammar, and your vocabulary all at the same time. That is brilliant. You're doing emotional work and language work simultaneously.
That's exactly right. And this is something I feel very passionately about. Many language learners think they need to separate their English practice from their real life. They think English is something that happens in a classroom or in front of a textbook. But the truth is that the most powerful English learning happens when the language is connected to genuine emotion, genuine meaning, genuine experience. When you say, "Today I am grateful for the smell of my coffee this morning," you're not just practicing grammar, you're connecting the English language to a moment of real sensory pleasure. And that emotional connection is what helps the language travel from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. It's what makes words and phrases stick.
I want to ask about something that often trips me up specifically. Sometimes when I try to practice English in the morning, I feel embarrassed, even though I'm completely alone. Has anyone else ever felt that? Is that normal?
It's incredibly normal, and I'm so glad you named it because many of our listeners feel exactly the same way and have never heard anyone else say it out loud. Speaking a foreign language when no one is listening can feel strange and even a little vulnerable. There's a psychological concept called language ego, which was described by the linguist Alexander Giora. The idea is that when we speak a language that is not our own, we are presenting a version of ourselves that feels incomplete, imperfect, childish. And because our identity is so closely tied to our ability to express ourselves, speaking imperfect English can feel threatening to our sense of self. We feel exposed, even alone.
Yes, that is exactly it. I feel like a different, less capable version of myself when I speak English, and it makes me want to stop.
And that feeling, while completely understandable, is actually one of the biggest barriers to fluency that exists, because fluency comes from consistent, repeated, imperfect practice. There is no path to confident English speaking that does not pass through thousands of awkward, embarrassing, imperfect moments of speaking. So when you practice your gratitude sentences in English every morning, even when your accent is thick and your grammar is wrong and you stumble over the words, you're doing something profoundly brave. You're training your language ego to be flexible and resilient. You're teaching your brain that the English-speaking version of you is still you, just growing.
I love that. Just growing. Okay, Anna, let's move on. You mentioned something earlier about setting intentions versus a to-do list. I'm very curious about that distinction. Can you explain what the difference is?
Absolutely. And this distinction is one that I think will genuinely transform the way our listeners approach their days. Most of us are familiar with the to-do list. You write down all the tasks you need to complete, pay the electricity bill, send an email to my boss, buy groceries, finish the report. And on the surface, a to-do list seems helpful. It organizes your responsibilities. But there is a hidden problem with the traditional to-do list, which is that it describes what you will do without any consideration of how or why you will do it. It treats your day as a series of transactions. Check this box, then check this box, then check this box. And when you live your day as a series of transactions, you can complete every single item on your list and still go to bed feeling empty and unfulfilled because you were never connected to the deeper meaning behind your actions.
I have had days exactly like that. I was incredibly productive on paper, but at night I felt like something important was missing. Like I had been very busy, but not very alive.
Busy but not very alive. That is a beautiful and heartbreaking way to describe it, Abel, and I think it captures something that millions of people feel every single day. This is where the intentionality list is completely different. An intentionality list does not just ask what you will do, it asks who you will be while you do it. It is a statement of values and character, not just tasks. Let me give you an example. On a to-do list, you might write, "Have a meeting with my team." On an intentionality list, you might write, I will be fully present and genuinely curious during my meeting with my team. I will listen more than I speak, and I will make each person feel that their ideas are valued. Do you feel the difference?
I do. The first one describes an event. The second one describes a way of being.
Exactly. And here is why this matters for English learners specifically. One of the most common intentions I recommend for our listeners is something like, today I will approach my English practice with patience and playfulness. I will not judge myself when I make mistakes. I will treat every error as information, not as failure. When you set that intention in the morning and you write it in English in your journal, you are not just planning your day, you are programming your emotional response to challenge. You are deciding in advance how you will feel when things get difficult. And that advanced decision is incredibly powerful. Because when you're in the middle of a difficult moment, when you're reading an English text and you cannot understand a paragraph, when you try to speak and the words will not come, you have something to return to. You have your intention.
That is such a practical and beautiful idea. Writing your intentions in English is also a form of English practice, is it not? You are using grammar, vocabulary, all at once.
It is absolutely a form of English practice, and it is a deeply meaningful one. When you write about your own values and your own goals in English, you are doing something that goes far beyond grammar drills and vocabulary lists. You are building what I call an emotional vocabulary in English. You are learning words like patience, resilience, curiosity, compassion, perseverance, intentionality, and you're learning them not as abstract definitions in a dictionary, but as living, breathing concepts that are directly connected to your own life and your own goals. And words that are connected to strong emotions and personal meaning are remembered far more effectively than words learned in isolation.
Let us talk about something very practical now. A lot of our listeners lead busy lives. They have children to take care of, jobs to get to, 100 responsibilities. How can they realistically integrate English practice into their mornings when they barely have time to drink their coffee?
This is such an important and practical question, and I want to address it with complete honesty. Many people hear the phrase morning routine, and they imagine someone who wakes up at 5 in the morning, has 2 hours of free time, does yoga, meditates, journals, exercises, reads a book, and then calmly drinks a green smoothie before a peaceful, unhurried commute to work. And that picture is wonderful if it is your reality. But for most people, and especially for working parents and students with heavy schedules, that picture is not reality. So I want to talk about what I call minimum effective dose English immersion. The idea is simple. You only need 10 minutes of focused English practice in the morning to create meaningful, lasting progress over time.
10 minutes? That feels manageable. But what can you actually accomplish in 10 minutes?
You can accomplish a great deal if those 10 minutes are intentional and consistent. Let me give you several specific examples of how to integrate 10 minutes of English immersion into a busy morning. The first option is listening while you do something else. While you're making your breakfast, while you're getting dressed, while you're drinking your coffee, you can play a slow English podcast like this one, or an English audio course, or even an English song and focus on understanding the lyrics. You're not sitting still and studying, you are living your life and absorbing English at the same time. This is called incidental learning, and it is one of the most powerful and underutilized tools in language acquisition.
I love that idea because it removes the feeling that English practice is something separate from real life. It becomes part of the routine, not an addition to it.
Exactly. And the second option is morning journaling in English. This is my personal favorite. Even just 5 to 7 sentences written in English each morning makes an extraordinary difference over time. You can write about what you did yesterday, what you're planning for today, how you're feeling, something interesting you noticed, a word you learned recently. It doesn't need to be complex or perfect, it just needs to be consistent. And the interesting thing about journaling in English is that it forces you to encounter the limits of your vocabulary in a very productive way. You will want to write something and not know the English word for it. That moment of not knowing and then looking up the word and then using it in your sentence is one of the most effective vocabulary learning experiences that exists.
What about speaking practice? Because I feel like speaking is a skill I need the most help with, but it's also the hardest one to practice alone in the morning.
Speaking alone is one of the most underrated language learning practices, and I want to dedicate a moment to it because I know many learners feel uncomfortable with the idea. The technique is called self-directed speaking, and it is remarkably effective. Here's how it works. After you have set your intentions or written your gratitude sentences, you simply talk to yourself in English for 2 to 3 minutes about anything at all. You can describe what you see around you. You can summarize a podcast you listen to. You can explain your plans for the day. You can talk about a problem you are trying to solve. You can narrate your morning like you are the host of a nature documentary about your own life. Today, the human being known as Abel is making his coffee. He is considering whether to add sugar. He decides, yes, it is a brave and excellent decision.
I love that. I am going to narrate my own morning like a documentary. That actually makes it feel playful rather than scary.
And playfulness is the key. Research in language acquisition consistently shows that learners who approach language practice with playfulness and low anxiety acquire new language far more quickly than learners who approach it with seriousness and fear of mistakes. When you are playing with language, when you're laughing at yourself and experimenting with words, your brain is in an open, curious, receptive state. Your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, is calm. And when the amygdala is calm, information flows freely into your long-term memory. Fear, on the other hand, activates the amygdala, and when the amygdala is activated, the brain's resources are redirected towards survival rather than learning. This is why so many language learners feel that they know much more English when they are relaxed than when they are nervous and under pressure.
That explains why I always seem to forget all my English the moment I'm in a stressful situation, like a job interview, or when I meet a native speaker unexpectedly. My brain is in survival mode.
Your brain is in survival mode, and that is a completely natural and human response. And the good news is that the way you build resilience against that fear response is through consistent, low-stakes, enjoyable practice. Every morning that you narrate your coffee routine in English, every morning that you write your 5 gratitude sentences, every morning that you listen to a slow podcast while you eat your breakfast, you are training your brain to associate the English language with safety, pleasure, and routine. And over time, that association becomes stronger and stronger, so that even in high-stakes moments, your brain has a deeper reservoir of calm, confident English to draw from.
I want to make sure we talk about something that I know is close to many listeners' hearts, the idea that some people are simply not morning people. I've heard this my whole life. Some people say, I am a night owl, I am not designed for mornings, my brain does not work in the morning. Can these people still benefit from a morning routine, or is it not for them?
This is a question I feel very strongly about, and I want to answer it with both honesty and deep respect for the people who genuinely struggle with mornings. First, let us acknowledge the science. Chronobiology is the study of biological time, and it tells us that human beings genuinely do have different chronotypes. A chronotype is simply your natural preference for sleeping and waking at certain times. Roughly speaking, there are morning types who naturally wake up early and feel most energetic in the first half of the day. There are evening types who naturally stay up late and feel most creative and alert in the afternoon and evening. And there's a large middle group who falls somewhere between those two extremes.
So being a night owl is a real biological thing, not just an excuse.
It is a real biological thing, yes. It's influenced by genetics, by age, and by various hormonal factors. Teenagers, for example, have a genuine biological shift toward being evening types, which is why forcing teenagers to wake up at 6 in the morning for school is actually a public health issue that many scientists and educators are now speaking about. So I never want anyone to feel that being a night owl is a character flaw or a sign of laziness. It is simply a biological reality.
But then does that mean the whole idea of a morning routine doesn't apply to them? Or is there still a way forward?
There is absolutely a way forward, and it comes down to a very important reframing. A morning routine does not mean a 5 in the morning routine. A morning routine means a beginning of your day routine. Whatever time your day begins, whether it's 6 in the morning or 10 in the morning, the principles we've been talking about today apply equally. If you are a night owl and you naturally wake up at 8 or 9, your morning routine simply begins at 8 or 9. The no scroll challenge still applies, the movement still applies, the gratitude practice still applies, the English immersion still applies. None of these practices are dependent on the clock. They are about what you choose to do in the first hour of your active day, regardless of when that hour begins.
That is so freeing to hear. I think a lot of night owls have given up on the idea of having a meaningful morning routine because they feel like the entire concept was designed for early birds.
And that feeling has been reinforced by a lot of popular culture around productivity, where the message is always, successful people wake up at 4:30 in the morning. And while it's true that some very successful people do wake up very early, there are equally successful, creative, and productive people who do their best work at midnight. The novelist Franz Kafka, for example, wrote some of the most important literature of the 20th century almost entirely between 11 at night and 3 in the morning. That was simply when his brain was alive and ready. What mattered was not the time on the clock. What mattered was that he had a ritual, a routine, a sequence of practices that prepared his mind for deep, creative work.
So the lesson is, find your personal version of the morning routine and commit to it, rather than trying to copy someone else's version that doesn't fit your biology.
That's the lesson exactly. And I want to add one more thing for our night owl listeners who do want to gradually shift their schedule earlier, perhaps because of work, family, or social obligations. The most effective and gentle way to do this is not to suddenly set your alarm 2 hours earlier, which is a shocking strategy that rarely works and often makes people more tired and miserable. Instead, the recommendation from sleep scientists is to shift your wake time by just 15 minutes earlier every 3 to 4 days. This gives your circadian rhythm, which is your internal biological clock, time to gradually adjust without causing significant sleep disruption. It's a slow, kind, incremental process, much like learning a language.
I love that comparison. Shifting your schedule a little at a time, just like building vocabulary a little at a time.
Progress is always the same shape, regardless of what we are working on. It is small, consistent steps taken daily over a long period of time. There are no shortcuts in language learning, and there are no shortcuts in building a meaningful life. But there is something that makes the journey infinitely more enjoyable, and that is the concept of morning momentum.
Morning momentum. Can you explain that? I'd love the sound of those words together.
Morning momentum is the idea that small, positive actions taken early in the day create a psychological and neurological snowball effect. When you complete a small, intentional action in the morning, for example, when you do your 5 minutes of stretching, your brain releases a small amount of dopamine. And remember, dopamine is not just the pleasure chemical. It is also the motivation chemical. It is the chemical that says, that felt good, let us do more of that. So when you complete your stretching, you feel a small sense of achievement. And that small sense of achievement makes the next action slightly easier. You sit down and write your gratitude sentences, and you get another small dopamine reward. You listen to 5 minutes of English and understand most of it, another small reward. By the time you arrive at 9 in the morning, you have already completed 5 or 6 intentional actions. You have already had several small wins, and your brain is bathed in just enough dopamine to feel motivated, focused, and capable.
So the morning routine is essentially a dopamine management strategy.
It is a dopamine management strategy, brilliantly put, and it is deeply different from the random, chaotic dopamine of social media scrolling. The dopamine you get from completing a meaningful morning practice is what researchers call earned dopamine. It comes from effort, from intention, from connection to your values, and earned dopamine has a fundamentally different quality from the shallow dopamine of passive scrolling. Earned dopamine makes you feel proud, calm, and capable. Passive dopamine makes you feel stimulated in the moment and depleted shortly afterward.
I think what I'm hearing is that the morning routine is not really about productivity at all in the traditional sense. It's about choosing the quality of your internal experience for the day.
That is perhaps the most beautiful summary of this entire conversation, Abel. And I want our listeners to sit with that idea for a moment. The morning routine is not about productivity. It is not about becoming a high performance machine. It is not about checking boxes or optimizing your output. It is about choosing, deliberately and with great care, the quality of your internal experience for the 16 hours that follow your waking. It is about saying, I am not going to let the algorithm or the news cycle or my boss's email or my neighbor's Instagram photos determine how I feel today. I am going to determine that. I am going to plant the seeds of my own emotional garden before the world gets a chance to plant its seeds for me.
That is incredibly empowering, and I think it connects to the English learning journey as well, because learning English is also an act of self-determination. You're choosing to expand your world, to access new ideas, new communities, new opportunities, all through the decision to learn this language.
Absolutely. And I want to leave our listeners with this thought as we bring today's conversation to a close. Every morning is a doorway, and the way you walk through that doorway, whether you stumble through it half asleep and straight into your phone, or whether you step through it with intention, with movement, with gratitude, with a few brave sentences spoken in English, that choice shapes not just your day, but over time it shapes your entire life. The person you will be in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years is being built right now in the small, quiet choices you make in the first hour of every single day.
And for anyone listening to this podcast who is on the journey of learning English, I want you to know that choosing to spend part of your morning with English, even just 10 minutes, even just one podcast, even just 3 sentences spoken out loud to your empty kitchen, is one of the most powerful investments you can make in your own future. And every small, imperfect, brave step you take in the morning is proof that you are already the kind of person who shows up for themselves.